shutdown of I-94 between Minneapolis and St. Paul, which is called the Rondo Project, safety on the LRT, if there is such a thing, fare policy on LRT, and so forth. These are some of the issues that are not being covered in the fake news media today. So Annette, come on up. Well, try it and we'll see if it adjusts you.
Okay, sorry about that. I'll try it one more time. Can y'all hear me? Oh, there we go. If it makes you feel any better, I'm deafer than all of you. So probably all of you combined have just got new supersonic hearing aids. So if I'm yelling, tell me. I'm just thrilled to be here. Isn't it fun to gather again in person? I'm sorry. It's just such a treat to see real people rather than staring at a screen for 8 hours a day. So thank you all for inviting me. Thank you, Don Patton, for suggesting a topic I haven't talked about in a long time. For those of you who I haven't met, my name is Annette Meeks, and actually 11 years ago, I came up with this idea that somebody needs to focus in the state of Minnesota doing research on some issues that I believe are really, really important. And I call them the 4 T's. They're transportation, taxes, government transparency, and technology. We just added a 5th one, which is elections. And I want to add a little coda, which we have in the back table as you leave. We are doing a 3-part election series at the Freedom Foundation. One is already out, and I brought it because I know it's in Bloomington, on ranked choice voting. Everything you need to know about ranked choice voting, and what a crime it is that we have this in any of our communities. People often ask me, what happened to the city of Minneapolis? And I say, go back to ranked choice voting as one of the key reasons why the fact we have a bunch of lunatics running our city of Minneapolis who look at crime and say, it's not that bad. I live in downtown Minneapolis. My office is in downtown Minneapolis. Let me tell you, it is worse than you read every day in the newspaper. It's 10 times worse. So with that little rant over, pick one of these up on your way out. If you feel so inclined, you'll see there's a place where you can join with us. $100 a year makes you a member, which means we don't spam. We don't sell our list to anyone, ever. Never have, never will. But what we do is we do a monthly email newsletter, kind of topics of interest that are happening around the state we think you'll be interested in. And you get free copies of all of our reports when they come out. So with that said, I also want to add one more election thing. If you vote by absentee, under Minnesota law, current law, you have 2 weeks to fix a ballot. Once you turn it in, if you mail it, you hand it in, whatever it is, you have 2 weeks before they can open that ballot and legally open that ballot. And if you made a mistake, or if a candidate has died or anything, you can legally go in to your local polling precinct, wherever that is, pre the early voting process, and cure your ballot, meaning they will pull your absentee ballot and you can vote again. So don't let anyone tell you, it's one of the bills that the Democrats had at the legislature this past year to eliminate that. And that is a terrible disservice to anyone who's ever voted early and then catastrophe strikes, whether that's a plane crash or a candidate dies, whatever it is. We still must always have that right to change a ballot when you do early voting. So with that said, yes ma'am.
Is it true? I voted yesterday. And is my vote?
It's not on.
Is my vote going to go to Minneapolis? They're going to open it up?
Not yet.
And they're going to, because I voted yesterday, is that a true, I mean, should I have waited until?
No, they cannot open it legally until 14 days prior to the primary election.
Legally.
Well, legally, how?
Legally, but.
They will have the ballot at the central counting area in Minneapolis where they collect all the absentee ballots. Then on election day, they distribute them to all of the precincts. So they have not opened that ballot until 14 days prior to the primary or 14 days prior to the general. Then they can start opening them.
I went to the polling booth. I mean, I went to Edina City Hall and voted. I
In
didn't
person.
send it in person.
So your vote is tallied. already. It is not counted, but it is in the process. If you wanted to go in and change your ballot, I don't know the process of doing that because you voted in person.
Right, I don't wanna change it, I just don't want it ripped up. I don't want it torn, I don't want it
Right.
to go to Minneapolis.
There's always a paper ballot that's a redundant system that we have. So once your vote is, you put it in through the machine, when you finish voting, there's still a paper copy of that. It doesn't identify you in any way, but it is still a paper copy. So at the end of the day, anybody who's ever been an election judge can tell you, you have to have the same amount of voters as you have paper ballots that are counted and absentees. I could go back to the Coleman recount, which was stolen from us, and I live in one of those precincts in downtown Minneapolis that had more votes than voters. And they never did reconcile that.
No,
Never did. But I'm not here to talk about elections, but if you have some questions, I'm happy to answer those at the end. I'm going to be a little rushed today because when I'm done here, I am going out to do my final walkthrough before my closing on my new house because I'm leaving Hennepin County and I'm leaving the city of Minneapolis. I've had it. My husband and I lived there our entire married life, 28 years, and always thought we would retire and live there happily. And in the last 2 years, the city of Minneapolis has become just, pardon me, a hellhole that I no longer want to be a part of. What happened over the 4th of July, I still am not able to quite process. That's 2 blocks from where I live. And you see that somebody's willingly shooting a bottle rocket at a woman out walking her dog. And you realize, I don't want to be around these people, whether it's the dark of night or bright daylight. These are not civilized people that are harming my neighbors. And so we bought a new house, moved to Dakota County. Never thought I'd live out in Dakota County, but here I come. I've got a funny story to tell you though. Anybody buy a house recently in the last year? Man, it's a process like you've never seen. But it's like, remember that old movie Around the World in 80 Days where they're all chasing each other looking for a fortune that's buried somewhere and they just have clues? That's what it's like to buy a house today. It's quite something. We had a wonderful realtor who would call us and say, I've got a good one. I want you to go take a look at out in Prior Lake. So we would go out there and we'd have these high hopes. He'd say, you're only the second person to go through this house. So we think, woohoo, we've got this one if we like it. And you'd go see the house and it would, well, my personal favorite was one, it sounded like the Indy 500 was going by on the outside. And it was so loud. I live in downtown Minneapolis. Even I looked at it and said, this is too loud. Heck, I'm deaf. And even I said, this is too loud. And you're walking around and yet people are going around ahead of you trying to psych you up because they're going to make an offer ahead of you that's better and bigger and no inspection and all this. And we weren't willing to play that game. So we stuck it out. And we finally found what we thought was just, we believed to be a fabulous house. And we're really excited. But I have to tell you, there's one more catch to this. So I did insist upon an inspection. The house is 15 years old, and I thought, I want to see if the furnace and everything are in good shape. I don't know anything about a furnace. So we hired an inspector, and he sent me an email that went to my spam folder. And he said, well, didn't you get it? And I said, well, not that I've seen. He said, well, go to your spam folder. And the reason why I didn't get it is our inspector's name was Tim Waltz. I'm not kidding. And in my email, that goes to spam. But I got such a kick out of it. He was a genuinely really good home inspector from Washington County and said, you have no idea the living hell my life has been these last 4 years. And I went, oh, I bet I can guess. So anyway, I have to go out and meet with them at 1 o'clock. So I'm going to be booking out of here. But I also want to offer you, there are reports in the back. We have an election series that we are just finishing. This is part 1 of 3 on ranked choice voting. We have just finished one on election changes we would like to see to make our elections more safe and secure. I think if any of us learned anything after the 2020 elections is we have a mess on our hands. And we have a mess because, frankly, we haven't paid much attention to elections. But I'll tell you, when elections go bad, it is one of the most serious problems in our country. Your vote is sacred. And we've always believed that our votes are captured and counted accurately. And when you cast doubt in people's minds, and it's not just the people in this room. It's about 63% of all Americans don't believe they have confidence in our elections. There's something wrong. And so we decided to propose some changes to Minnesota election laws to make it safer, more secure, and frankly bolster confidence as all of us go forward. And then we have a third one that will be coming out on the new Democrats. You know, when you lose, it's hard. And when you really lose by a lot and realize most of America doesn't like you and doesn't agree with your proposals, well, then you do what the Democrats do. You try to change the rules. So, you know, they tried to stack the Supreme Court, for example. Well, their latest is bringing back a way to get rid of the Electoral College. And so we have a report coming out on that. That'll be out right before the legislative session that starts in January. It is probably the most un-American idea they've ever come up with, and it's catching fire. 17 states have already ratified it. They don't want to change the Constitution, which is the right way of doing it. They just want to have states pass a law saying, we're just going to give it to the popular vote and do it that way. Because if we had a national popular vote, Hillary Clinton would have been president. That's what they like to say, and that's what gets their supporters going. So with that, that's what we do. We do this research. It's funded by independents. We don't take any government money. And we've done this research now, like I said, for 11 years. We pride ourselves on being fiercely independent, but with a market-based alternative to what you hear mostly coming from the mainstream media and certain government. With that, you can imagine how surprised I was when Jim Pawlenty called me one day, right after he was sworn in as governor, and said, I want you to go shake up the Met Council. And I said, I don't like the Met Council. And he said, that's right. That's why I want you to go in there and shake that place up. And so being relatively young and idealistic, I thought, how hard could that be? And so I like to say I served 8 years of hard labor on the Met Council, 2 years as chair of the Transportation Committee, and I learned an awful lot. I started because I really was very naive about everything that was happening, and just to give you some perspective on what was happening, there was no light rail, there was no heavy rail, there was no rail in Minnesota except what private Burlington Western, the Twin Cities and Western railroads, that's the only rail we had, was private rail. There was no government funded transportation like that. The Met Council ran the bus system. And contrary to what you may read and hear, we have a wildly efficient bus system. It's wildly efficient because it's flexible. It goes to where jobs are. When jobs are created in Shakopee, we can't build a light rail line out in Shakopee, but we can change a bus route out there. When people start moving further away from the Twin Cities, as they have done for the last 20 years, we can move bus lines to go pick them up and get them to where they go. But most importantly, it is so inexpensive to run a bus. Even the new buses that we've been doing, which you've probably seen around the Twin Cities, that are more express line buses. They don't stop every mile along University Avenue, for example. These buses are very, very efficient and carry a lot of people and get the job done at a very modest cost. But they don't involve digging up any streets. They don't involve digging up any roads. For, in this case, Southwest Light Rail, almost 10 years. And more importantly, like I said, when people move, they can move with them. But that's not what's stylish these days. Starting back in the Arnie Carlson administration, y'all with me, huh? Talk to seniors, y'all remember Arnie. It became determined that you were not a city of the first class if you didn't have light rail. I don't know how many of you ever heard anybody from the local chambers of commerce. They would do business leader trips. They did a lot of trips out to cities that had light rail, including Denver and a number of others, to talk to them about, see how progressive Denver is, see how fast Denver is growing, look at how quickly they can move people in and out of the downtown area with their new light rail. Boy, that's a city of the first class. Next thing you know, Phoenix, Seattle, all of these cities were jumping on the rail bandwagon, and we weren't. And suddenly this became an issue. And Arnie Carlson and many others, it wasn't just him, said this is what we need. We need to be a city of the first class. So we started the planning process. And this is what I'm really going to focus on, because we tend to focus on how do we end up with these messes like Southwest Light Rail? There's an even bigger one that you don't read about every day, and that's really what I'm going to focus on today, and that is the North Star Commuter Rail. How do we end up with this stuff? Let me tell you, it is one person who is so driven to develop whatever line it is that they decide it becomes their passion, and it's virtually impossible to stop it once they get going. I knew none of this. When I was first appointed to the Transportation Committee, I'm not making a word of this up. The first meeting, I got about a 350-page document, which was all of the grants and different things we were going to go over at our first meeting. I looked at this and thought, we're going to do this every 2 weeks. My gosh, I'll never read another book again. Just getting through this pile of reading in preparation for my transportation committee. So I got out my pile of Post-it notes, my highlighter markers, and I went through every doggone page. I was so ready. I think I had 36 Post-it notes with questions. And I got to the meeting and started asking my questions because we were funding things on the Transportation Committee, and I'm not making any of this up. We funded a transportation museum in Hennepin County. We funded decorative streetlights for the city. And you're just going through this stuff going, really? We can't build a lane of roads, but we can put in decorative streetlights? This just seems like such a colossal waste of money. And after I got to about question number 14 or 15, one of the staffers took me aside and said, you understand you can't stop this, don't you? I said, I don't. I don't understand that at all. And she said, come with me. And took me out back and said, these are pass-through grants. This is Hennepin County has applied for these grants. All we are on the Met Council is the pass-through entity. The federal government has funded all of these projects. You cannot stop any of this. To which I looked at her, I've been on the council for 7 days, and said, so why are we here? If we can't stop any of this, why are we even here? And she said, well, that's a metaphysical question for another day. Right now, we have to get through this agenda, and so that Hennepin County can get their money, and Dakota County, and Washington County, whoever applied for these grants. So that is really how it starts, is one person sitting in Hennepin County, down on 6th Street in downtown Minneapolis, comes up with this plan that says we need decorative streetlights for this road, and they apply for a federal grant. They give Congresswoman Betty McCollum or Senator Tina Flint Smith or whoever it is to support the plan, and boom, that's it. It's done. We get the money through either MnDOT or through the Metropolitan Council, and we can't stop it. It's a done deal. Imagine, if you will, and this is how the really colossal bad ideas get funded. Imagine when they come up with an idea for another light rail line, and that's where I entered in the picture. Starting, as I learned with Arnie Carlson, they had started planning for the very first light rail line, which was not the one that goes out here on American Boulevard through Bloomington. It was not. It was the green line that goes from Minneapolis to St. Paul. However, a little roadblock hit them in their planning for this, and that was called the presidency of George W. Bush. The Bush administration looked at all these monies going to, remember what I said about the cities of first class? And said, man, this is nuts. We can't keep spending money on all these rail projects all over the country. And so what they did is said, here's a formula. There has to be a way to say, this will move a lot of people the most economical way through point A to point B. And if you can't meet that funding formula, you're not going to get any money. Oh, did I mention? The feds at that point were offering up to 90% of a project, which is why these city planners were sitting there looking at that and salivating. 90%. Well, who wouldn't? As they like to tell you, that's free money. You know, from the federal coffers, that's free. I guess they don't pay taxes. But anyway, as we were going through this process of kind of peeling back this onion, trying to understand, I discovered that under the administration of Arnie Carlson, we had started planning the light rail between Minneapolis and St. Paul, the Southwest light rail line that's currently the biggest debacle you'll ever see in the state of Minnesota, I hope and pray, and the North Star Commuter Rail. Those all started way back in the early 1980s, if you can believe that. Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to say, when I was in college, it makes me feel a little better. But these projects start with one person, and almost every single one that I just mentioned started with one person in Hennepin County, Commissioner Peter McLaughlin. And this was his dream, to have this integrated rail network that would connect all of the cities into a central spoke, downtown Minneapolis, and that would be the hub, with all these spokes that come in from Eden Prairie, from downtown St. Paul, from Bloomington, Minnesota, and ultimately St. Cloud on the light rail, or the heavy rail, excuse me. So with all of this in the works, what they do is they apply for these grants. Remember the grants I was trying to cancel? Well, they start getting some very serious grants, and I'm talking $7–8 million a pop. These are called planning grants. They pay for transportation planners that they hire, and they go through and they develop these light rail lines. When I entered the picture, this is how far along the process had gone. And now remember, this is a Plenty administration. This is recent history. In the early 2000s, on the Southwest Light Rail. And I decide, you know, Bill Buckley was always one of my personal heroes, and he always had this thing when people said, what is a conservative? And he said, well, a conservative stands in front of a progressive idea and says, stop. And I decided, that's who I'll be. I will be the person that will stop Southwest Light Rail. That will be my goal.
Good luck.
How'd I do? I'm still yelling, stop. I've probably written more editorials on the North Star Heavy Rail project than anybody else in human history, and you can't stop these things. It really is that steaming locomotive coming right at you. And it's not because they threaten you or anything like that. It's just these you're frequently met with the comment of, we've already invested $15 million. I don't care. $15 million is a small price to pay for stopping a $3 billion light rail project that no one is going to ride and no one needs. I'm sorry, that's just a small price to pay. I'm sorry we wasted $15 million, but now's the time to stop this nonsense that's been going on for almost 30 years. So I'm going to focus on one. And the reason why I'm focusing on North Star, not only because it is the bane of my existence, it started operating while I was still on the Met Council, but more importantly, it is the biggest waste of money, I will argue, of any rail project in the United States. That's a pretty bold statement, isn't it? Let me tell you why I can say that. It's 40 miles. It was supposed to go from St. Cloud to downtown Minneapolis. Well, immediately, remember I said that Bush administration thing that said you had to see if it was worthy of funding? It didn't pass. It didn't even come close to passing. So I thought, haha, we got him. We're going to get the Bush administration to stop this. Not a chance. Those planners, there's a reason why they're called planners. They said, well, we'll stop it at Big Lake. Well, if you cut off that Big Lake to St. Cloud route, it passed funding. Next thing I know, we get a letter from the Bush administration saying, all right, you can build it. I said, no, we don't want to build this. But off they went. That plan started in 1997 under Ernie Carlson. Then, remember our other big mistake called Governor Jesse Ventura? Jesse was from where? Anoka County. This whole plan of heavy rail to St. Cloud to Minneapolis was one county commissioner in Anoka County, his dream. His job really, I've never seen anything like it. He just determined, I started going to these meetings to see if I could figure out how we could derail this one. And he decided this is going to be his legacy. And indeed it is. It's a doggone nightmare. It is a rail line. Has anybody ever ridden it? All right, two of us. It goes parallel to Interstate 94 and Highway 10, which also tells you how redundant it is and unnecessary it is. But on any given day, this thing went through many, many fights in the legislature, 3 different gubernatorial administrations, and it was funded by the federal government, $156.8 million. Like I said, that follows, if you drive Highway 10, you can actually follow the train. It started running 7 days a week, which really drove me crazy because then it became a Twins thing. People would take it to come into town for the Twins game, and we were told that was good. My theory is if you can afford to come to a Twins game in downtown Minneapolis, you can afford to pay for parking. And why are we subsidizing all of this stuff? But this is the Anoka County, my nemesis on Anoka County, who said, this is a good thing because the more taxpayers we get to ride this thing, even if they're going to Twins games or Vikings games, whatever it is, the more people who support it. That's one way to look at wasting tax money. The state government, by the way, was not off the hook. At this point, the Bush administration had cut that 90% down to 50%. So the state government, state of Minnesota, all of us, paid $98.6 million to get the heavy rail going. Anoka County, anybody here from Anoka? $8.2 million. Hennepin County, $8 million. Met Council, $5.9 million. And the Minnesota Twins, I'm not making this up, $2.6 million. That's how we funded this heavy rail line. Your annual cost to operate this thing is almost $17 million. Again, one of those things nobody wants to talk about, but you can't build it and then say, we don't know how to operate it. Originally, I thought we could kill it by, it goes to St. Cloud, which is not within the Metropolitan Council's region. No, couldn't even kill it that way. It stopped in Big Lake, still not in the Metropolitan Council. It's a different county, it's Sherburne County and Becker up there. Couldn't kill it that way. So they started operating the line while I was still on the Met Council. It has been a disaster from the very first day it started operating. They predicted by 2030, which is not all that far away, there would be 6,200 people who board that train every single day. And I'm going to use numbers, by the way, that are pre-pandemic, just to give you some idea of what a colossal failure this is. After over 10 years of operating, it's still, in 2019, before anybody had ever heard of COVID-19, in 2019, still only had 2,700 daily riders. I mean, that's not even half of what they projected. But you look at that and say, since then, and I quote the Met Council, they just released the new numbers, well, we lost 95% of our riders. 95%. Any reasonable, logical human being would say, we need to stop running this train. That's ridiculous. The Met Council finally said, we'll stop running it on Saturdays and Sundays. That's it? Well, we have a little funding problem, which is we have to pay for the locomotives and other things that we have bought by the federal government. We'd have to pay back part of that. That's still, taxpayers would come out ahead. If we just paid back everything, we'd still come out ahead, rather than sinking almost $20 million a year into operating costs of a line that nobody rides. It's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. Now, trying to stop that, like I said, the old Bill Buckley standing in front of a progressive idea and saying stop, and they just run you right over, that's what we have here. We have runaway trains. We now have the Southwest Light Rail line. I don't even know where to start with that. I will end with telling you just kind of the brief facts behind it. Again, this has been 4 governors that have tried to figure this one out. This is such a colossal mistake that the legislature, by I believe it was a unanimous vote in the Senate and only 1 vote in the House, agreed to finally audit the mess that's called the Southwest Light Rail Line. Southwest starts in downtown Minneapolis and goes to Eden Prairie. It has 16 stops. It's 14.5 miles. And believe it or not, folks, you can drive it faster than the train will get you there. That's always the case because they have so many stops. It'll take you 32 minutes to get from Eden Prairie to Minneapolis. My mom used to live in Eden Prairie. I could do it in 20 minutes, and I do not speed. So that tells you how ridiculous this line is and how unnecessary. But now it's facing a multitude of lawsuits. When I was the only no vote. My husband used to call me Dr. No. So I would go to my Met Council meetings and vote no on all these things. It was $800 million in 2018. And I thought that was a colossal waste of money. Folks, we're up to $3 billion building a light rail line from downtown Minneapolis to Eden Prairie. $3 billion. I can remember when Mark Dayton had a fit when he hit $2 billion. And Mark Dayton was not exactly what you would call a fiscal conservative. He even thought $2 billion was too much. Now we're pushing 3, and finally we have a legislature, thank God for the Republicans in the state Senate, who said enough is enough. We've got to figure this out, and maybe we can just stop making a bigger mess than we already have. But when did this project start? I dug through a bunch of stuff today. 1988. Yeah, that's a long time. One of the things one of your takeaways today. Progressive ideas never go away. Whether it's ranked choice voting, whether it's light rail, whether it's whatever progressive notion it is, they will lie in wait until they get their way. Number 2, might makes right. Saying no, me sitting there, they must have had a good laugh, really, of me sitting there for 8 years saying, no, this is a bad idea. This is wasting money. I can remember when they wanted to fix up the heavy rail stop at the Twin Stadium. And the Twin came forward and said, well, we'll put in some more money. Like, how about if none of us put in any more money? How about if we do that? Yeah. Well, then they have someone come forward from the Federal Transportation Administration to tell me that I was endangering people's lives. Really? People ride it every day. Haven't heard one person falling off they said the stop was not safe. And I haven't heard one person falling off. I've heard of trains hitting people, but that's different than somebody falling off a train stop. Seems pretty safe to me, but that's part of the might makes right. They will always find a way to justify what they want. And they will not stop at you. No matter what you say, you're one voice in the wilderness out there against their plan, and they know that ultimately they will get their way. I'll get to you in just a second. I'm going to just wrap up here and take all your questions. The third thing is, no matter what the idea is from the left, if you are opposed to this, you are anti-progress. And somehow that makes you a Neanderthal, or as I used to call myself, a Luddite. The fact that I don't want to go back to transportation from the 1800s somehow either made me anti-progress. Trains were pretty popular in the 1800s because that's all we had. Normal people didn't have 2 and 3 automobiles like we do today, but we have them today. And why are we still fixated on especially heavy rail to St. Cloud? By the way, pre-pandemic, I skipped over this and I should have said this. There is a lefty from St. Cloud who had a bill he introduced, you can't make this up, to build the final leg to St. Cloud, because failure is not an option. No matter how rotten this heavy rail line is between Minneapolis and Big Lake, he wants to make it bigger and go all the way to St. Cloud. His reasoning, he said to me, students will take it. Students? You think somebody is going to commute from Minneapolis to St. Cloud every day on a train? And then come back? Well, that's nuts. It's even nuttier after COVID, because people are not climbing back on the train. We're back to running 5 trains a day. As you can see, they're mostly empty. They understand that this is a problem, and they also understand that people likely aren't going to hop back on those trains because there never were people on those trains. But that doesn't stop them. There is nary any talk of stopping that train, running each and every day, 5 times a day through downtown Minneapolis. If you ever get a chance, if you're ever at a Twins game or anything, take a look at how many people pull in. Sometimes you'll see maybe 2 or 3 people, that's it. But when you go during the week, during the work week, you'll see nobody. We filmed them. You want to make them mad? Film them. They don't like that either. And the last thing I'm sorry.
They'll probably arrest you.
Oh, yeah, don't give them ideas. The last thing I will say is 20, 30 years they plan and we do nothing. If I were to fault the conservative movement in general, is we oftentimes don't pay attention to who we elect in these local offices. And they matter. They matter a lot. Your county commissioners matter a great deal. That's where every one of these plans started. Some county board, whether it was Anoka County, whether it was Hennepin County, these jobs are very, very important. And as conservatives, we've got to take ownership of those local elected officials and get our people to run who have our values and frankly, who share our concerns about where our tax dollars are being used. You know, in all this time, ask me how many lanes of 494 have been added while we've been building all of these trains. It's ridiculous. We are out here by the most busy intersection in the entire state, at where 35 hits 494. Have we added any lanes in my lifetime? Not one. Not one. Are we likely to? Never. 94, I told Don I have to touch on this because we're doing the research on this right now. $7 million, almost $8 million, just went to a grant in St. Paul, a group that wants to close down Interstate 94. I'm not making this up, not one word of this. They believe that Interstate 94 divided the Rondo neighborhood back in 1968 when we opened up Interstate 94, and indeed it did. But I can't undo that today. To say that we're going to route everyone on 694 around the Twin Cities would at a considerable time a logistical nightmare on 390 or 494 and 694. But more importantly, we need Interstate 94 connecting the two Twin Cities. The interstate cannot add lanes at all. It's really bunkered in there as a 4-lane interstate highway. I accept that, but the worst thing we could do is make it worse. The traffic congestion we once had pre-COVID in the Twin Cities. And shutting it down and putting a boulevard over that, they call it the trench, where they dug through the interstate in the 1960s, would only make our matters worse. But these people have $8 million from the state DOT right now, and they are working on the planning on doing this. There's a second group that wants to add the local traffic, take Summit Avenue down to 1 lane each way and add a dedicated parkway for bicycles. Can't make this stuff up, people. But they have the money, they have the planning grants, and that's the seed that starts all these things, which brings me back to we need people to run for these local offices, and we need them to win, and to get in there and say enough. I will not pass any rail projects. I will not spend, I live right outside of my condo is $1 million bike lane. And on any given day I watch that and it is completely, I call it the bike superhighway in downtown Minneapolis, it's completely empty. I would have loved to have had that $1 million to do just fill the doggone potholes. But we don't do that, we build $1 million bike lane. And last but not least, we have to spread the word on how important these local offices are. So often we focus on the big pictures, and believe me, I understand what I wouldn't give to have a Republican in the White House today. I got my 401k statement yesterday. Trust me, I want a Republican back in office. But we don't have that today. And in the meantime, we have to step up. And we have to step up as committed conservatives that say, I do care about my community. I'm actually sad. The condo I live in is the longest I've ever lived in any house. Now part of that's because I worked in politics and you move around a lot, but 28 years in one house is a long time. I told the movers when they moved me in that it's from here to a pine box. So take care with everything you moved me in with, and now here I am, not in the pine box yet, and I'm moving out to Dakota County to get away from the runaway crime. And that breaks my heart. And that's only happening because we have people who are silly people that we've elected to office in downtown Minneapolis through ranked choice voting and other means. We don't have a Republican Party that challenges these candidates anymore. And we've got to change that, because if we don't, trust me folks, they're coming out here. Ranked choice voting is their first step. And if we don't stop that, our grandchildren will be living in more hellholes like downtown Minneapolis, because it will happen to our suburbs very quickly. And I don't want to be doom and gloom, because here's the good news. The good news is most elected officials today that are working on these planning grants have given up on rail. They understand that we've built it and people don't come. COVID really brought that picture into bright light. COVID destroyed the ridership on light rail, especially the downtown line, the green line between Minneapolis and St. Paul. And the one out here that's been in operation the longest time is still never caught on to the rate that it once was projected to. And I guarantee you, Southwest Light Rail will not cost $3 billion. It will cost something north of that. And once we get it up and operating, we will regret the day we built that one too. But now they're looking at bus rapid transit. They're looking at much more flexible options because they understand people are moving away from the central city. Jobs are moving away from the central city. One of the biggest places that jobs were created pre-pandemic was Shakopee. We didn't even have a regular bus route out there. So that's the kind of planning that's in the works today. I am pleased to say that. But in the meantime, we've done a lot of damage to our system, and we need good conservatives to step up and say no more, because they will come back with their next harebrained idea. I don't know what it is because I'm no longer on that council, but I guarantee you they will, and we have to be the ones to stand and say stop. And with that, I'll stop and take your questions.
And then I have a question back here.
Don.
With regard to laws being broken, is there any liability to the consultants that made these estimates of ridership and cost? I mean, Southwest is 50% over budget.
Oh, Don, thank you for asking that question. I didn't say this because it sounds so doggone mean-spirited, but Hennepin County Commissioner, former Hennepin County Commissioner Gail Dorfman, she was the mayor of St. Louis Park. She was on the county board for several terms. She lives in sunny South California today. She's paying a real big price for all the horrible ideas she promoted. Peter McLaughlin, who represented downtown Minneapolis in the South, he was the Southwest, he was really Mr. Rail. He's retired, doesn't pay a price. Several others have retired. One of the big planners that worked on all of this is in the San Francisco Bay Area today. None of them that I could find lived and breathed the mess that they've created. And more importantly, they're not taxpayers in Minnesota today paying for this stuff that we will pay for ad nauseum. I mean, the operating costs do not go away. Southwest Light Rail, I forgot to mention. Hang on to your wallets, folks. That is all within Hennepin County. So Hennepin County taxpayers will pay 100% of the operating costs. That will be the first time that happens.
Well, and another legal question. I heard that the Met Council actually purchased the rail cars for the Southwest Light Rail before they broke ground.
We always did that, yes.
In Europe with no authorization. Is there any?
That's part of the full funding grant agreement that you get from the feds, is that they will pay for the rail cars and whatever. That's just part of the deal. That happens every time. What really galls me is, for example, going back to North Star, we bought reconditioned locomotives. So we could sell those. If we have to pay back the feds the initial $150 million that we got from them, we could sell those and use that money, the proceeds from that sale. But they never mention that. Yes, ma'am.
I guess a comment and a question. My question first. What is the subsidy that we pay for each rider on, say, Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. My question is, what is the rider subsidy on Southwest Light Rail and the one that comes, the North Star? What do we pay for them to ride it? And my comment is, and this kind of makes me chuckle, even though it's a little sad. Apparently, I've heard on some talk radio shows that there are condominiums in Minneapolis now that have cracked foundations, and their buildings are no longer really structurally secure because of the Southwest Rail construction. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be mean, but it kind of makes me chuckle a little bit, because you can bet a lot of these people are lefties, and this is happening to them. But anyway, the main question was the subsidy rate for those rails. Thank you, Annette.
You bet. I cannot tell you what Southwest is because, of course, that's not operating yet. So that's to come. But on I'll use North Star as an example. It would be cheaper to buy every person pre-pandemic who rode the light rail. Remember about 3,000 people, 2,900, 2,700. It'd be cheaper to buy them a Lexus every year to drive into the Twin Cities from Big Lake and pay for their parking too while they're downtown than it would be for us to continue operating that line. So it's like a private Lexus, except it's not private.
We cannot hear you.
You could not hear that?
I could. What would it buy?
Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was the first time. I was the first time that lived you situation of the railroad. My name is Dave Herbert, and I, since 1950s and 1960s, I am a civil engineer on the railroad, and I was in the Bechtel Corporation, and we were here and incented the railroad from the 1980s and into the 1990s, and I hope that the situations that they didn't like us, that now you do, and that is that the railroad transportation knows a lot more than the politicians. And that was the big thing that we had, because I had worked for it, and I was at Bechtel, I was a D-bomb. That's design it, build it, operate it, and maintain it. And our major service that I hope you're doing is safety is the first attitude in all ordinance. In any cases of doubt or uncertainty, the safe course of action must be taken. And I was told that a way that you can't do. One of the politicians, when I was over in the east, in the part, they said, "Oh no, I don't want you to do that because you're doing safety and we want to make money." And I said, well, the problem with safety, it doesn't have trains wreck, it doesn't have people injured, it doesn't have people killed, and that's better attitude than money. And I hope that that's an aspect that you're working on all of the railroad at this point in the situation.
You bring up a wonderful point, thank you. One of the things that happened back in the 80s is all of the county boards, whether Hennepin, Ramsey, all of them, formed a rail commission. It's a separate legal entity from the Hennepin County Board. It's Hennepin County Regional Rail Authority is what they call themselves. And they went around, and what did they do? They bought old rail lines that were no longer in use. But the problem with those is many of them run parallel lines. So for example, North Star actually runs on the rail tracks that are still in operation every day. And so what they require, because of the safety concerns of you putting people standing outside waiting to board a train, is outrageous, and it should be. These are heavy rail locomotives. They don't stop on a dime. They routinely can kill people if people do unsafe things, like stop on a train track. It happens every year.
That's what we do.
What happens with these is you have to take out insurance policies, the likes of which none of us can even imagine. But we're talking like $150 million annually that you have to take out in insurance for these lines because of their proximity. The Southwest Light Rail, I'll tie both questions together. The Southwest Light Rail line, there were 4 alternatives that could have been selected to build that light rail line. They chose the one that met their economic justice. Remember, the Bush administration was long gone. This is the Barack Obama administration. And it would carry more people of color, more people of, I can't remember the exact term, it's poor people. More people who needed, in their mind, passenger trains. And so this is what we chose rather than what would be the safest and best. What they chose is a line that goes dangerously close to a condominium in Lake Calhoun. And now, since construction has been going on for over 11 years, the condo owners are suing because they have found cracks in their foundation, cracks in their unit. It's an ongoing huge problem that will be resolved ultimately in litigation. It will be the same problem we had when we were building in downtown St. Paul, where we went dangerously close to Minnesota Public Radio, caused vibrations in their studio, where they're broadcasting live. And so the Met Council did what the Met Council always does. We paid them off and got a settlement out of court, and that was the end of that, and we built the light rail line. It was right by their studios. Every time I used to ride that, every time I go by there, I just sit there and think, oh, I bet somebody in there isn't happy right now. But safety is the least of their concerns. Economic justice, that's what they're worried about.
Okay, can you hear me?
Talk straight into the microphone.
Yeah, can you hear me? No?
If you talk straight into it like that,
Like this?
better.
It's right on my lip. I can also try.
There you go.
I used to live.
Not on now.
Can you? Okay, can you, now, yes.
I gotcha.
I moved in 21 from Calhoun Isles, and I was in Unit 903, looking over the light rail. Don't ask me how I was capable of selling my place, but I did. Anyway, my question is, given the audit and given these lawsuits, is there a possibility that it won't happen, that they will discontinue the Southwest Light Rail?
You asked the $3 billion question. Here's how I think it could happen. If we had a Republican governor and a Republican legislature, and they get back the audit next year, and they look at that and say, we cannot afford to build this. Remember, the argument right now is we can't afford to stop building this. But the argument now is going to have to be, this is such a mess. This was such a disaster from the very beginning. Remember, 1988, they started planning this in Hennepin County. So we have to go back a long, long time and look at how do we say we wasted $3 billion. And the only way I can do that is, my parents used to have a saying, which was, we're not going to throw good money after bad. And that's really what it's going to have to come down to. But in the history of any rail lines, I follow these all over the country. It's really fascinating. I cannot find any that have accepted the money from the feds, paid it back, and stopped building. I cannot find one, which is why I sound rather negative. On the other hand, let me tell you the future. And the future is starting, I believe, in December. Don't quote me on that, but very close. We will have a privately financed rail line that will go from Miami, from the airport, all the way to Orlando, to the airport. That thing will operate in 3 hours. Boom, private. California has been building a light rail line that is it will be the biggest disaster. It will be bigger than ours ever in the history of American transportation. And they just keep plowing more money, good money after bad. It's really hard to get government to stop, really is. But I think if we have a legislature and that audit comes back and says what we think it will say, that this is a disaster and nobody's going to ride like, would y'all get on one of these trains today knowing what you know about the crime, the COVID and everything else, right? I mean, it's nutty. It really is nutty to sit there and think we're gonna build more. But I think that's the only chance we have.
Okay, last question from Dan Hulbert, please.
Annette, thank you very much for your doing time on concern your sentence on that. We appreciate that. What are the prospects of, number one, doing away with the Met Council, or making them accountable by being publicly elected.
God bless you for asking that. Thank you. You know, I'm probably the only person that was, I've done this twice. I was appointed to the Met Council and had a plan to dissolve the Met Council, and I ran for lieutenant governor and had a plan to dissolve that office too. So I kind of don't believe in bigger government. With regard to the Met Council, the last thing we should do is make it elected. I cannot say that enough, because then it's permanent. We cannot get rid of it if we start electing them. What we need to do is get rid of it once and for all. This is not... I appreciate the fact that we have to deal the hand we're dealt, so to speak, and we oftentimes have legislators who, you know, we haven't controlled all of state government in my lifetime. And so the opportunity to do that is most people think is Pollyanna-ish to say, get rid of the Met Council. No, no, no. We must get rid of the Met Council, period. And there's a way you can do that. You can transfer all the transportation stuff, the planning, everything, over to the Minnesota Department of Transportation, where it rightfully belongs. Absolutely. They do the transportation planning for the rest of the state. There's 87 counties. 80 of them get by without a Met Council. Go figure. And you know what? Their roads from Isani to, sorry, I was going to do one for Senator Corinne back there. From Isani to Washington, do they abut? Does Isani and Washington County abut each other? Chisago. Their roads meet. They can do the planning. They can figure this out. They don't need the Met Council to tell them how to do it. The sewers, the wastewater treatment plant that the Met Council does, the most important job we do, in my humble opinion. You know what? The counties can do a pretty good job of that themselves. And you know what? It gets them focused on something that's real. Keeping our groundwater safe, keeping our toilets and water fresh and flushing and not going into the Mississippi River. That's a good job. Let the counties do that. At the airports, we have a bunch of ways we can do that, but mostly it should be in MnDOT where it belongs. Yes. And the parks, oh my gosh, don't even get me started on the parks. Talk about the most redundant thing we have. We have parks in the Met Council, so we have city parks, we have township parks, we have county parks, we have Met Council parks. Really? Do we really need all of these different park boards that do all these different jobs? What if we had one per county that said, we're going to run all the parks in Hennepin County, we're going to run all the parks in Ramsey County, and let them do their jobs? I didn't make a lot of friends while I was on the Met Council, but that really wasn't why I was there. But we started building, cabins in our regional parks. And I'm sorry if I step on any toes here, but we did that so people could have the experience of camping. Well, first of all, if you want to camp, I'll show you where REI is right over here. You can buy a tent and you can go camp. It's pretty cheap. Well, we don't need to build you cabins that were actually quite expensive cabins in metropolitan areas to teach people how to have the camping experience. But let me tell you, this is not a popular opinion. People think we should be doing that, and so they didn't support me, and we built the cabins. I just saw one of them the other day. It was written up, and people were talking about the rustic experience, and all I can do is chuckle. It's like, you're in Hennepin County. You're not in a rustic experience. I'm sorry. Come up to Walker. I'll show you rustic. But it's just that's the nonsense that permeates the Met Council. And we spend money like you wouldn't believe at the Met Council, and we just need to get rid of it. You don't elect it, you don't do anything. It's like putting a skirt on a pig. It's still a pig. And so I'll leave you with that happy thought. You can think the rest of the day about a skirt on a pig.
Thank you much, Annette. We really appreciate it. And if we need someone to head the council, we can elect you. Is that correct? No, I'm kidding. Please, no. You're going to desert the county and go out to Dakota. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I'll be happy to.
Okay.
I've got it. Right.
We've got to get rid of it, is what it is. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Our next meeting is going to be on Tuesday, August 9th. Can you hear me?